Yeah, we finished the rules in June of 2015 and implemented them July 2015. So we've been up and running in the program now for, a little over a year and a half. And yeah, I mean, it's been, as expected, when you have a comprehensive policy like this, which is really unprecedented in professional sports, combined with our very unique, kind of business model as it relates to professional sports. We have over 500 athletes spread across almost 40 countries throughout the world. It was a major, and it is a major undertaking, this anti-doping program. But thus far, we felt it's been an overwhelming success. And I always point to the feedback that I get from athletes and from camps to determine that success. And the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive that it has made a huge difference in the sport.
Okay, if we take, the day-to-day life of, a champion like Conor McGregor, how often can he expect to be tested? What's the process there that he has to follow?
Well, the beautiful thing is the program's transparent, so anybody, other fighters, fans, camps can go online to the USADA website and look at the numbers. They can see how many times Conor McGregor is tested, on a quarterly or yearly basis. But the beauty of the program is that all of that decision-making authority has been taken away from the UFC and given to USADA, the United States Anti-Doping Agency. They're the ones that make all the decisions on who's tested, how many times they're tested, when they're tested. And the other beauty is complete unpredictability in this program. So an athlete never truly knows when that test is coming. The possibility of being tested any one of 365 days of the year exists. So there's no blackout periods. So the day of the year, the time of the day, our athletes never know. Neither do I. UFC doesn't know when USADA is going to show up for a test. And that's important because if athletes have any ability to predict when a test is coming, if they were using performance-enhancing substances, they can manipulate the way those are used or time the way they're used to make sure they'd be clear from their system when a likely test is coming. Our athletes never know when that test is coming.
How successful do you feel that is? Because we've had a number of high-profile tests with a number of high-profile athletes. So is the system working so far, would you say?
Yeah, it's difficult to judge that because how do you prove a negative that nobody's using? So, we expected early on there was going to be probably some bumps and bruises and high-profile, positives, and there was. But in terms of judging the success of a program, again, I like to interact with our fighters and with our camps and those that have been around the sport for a long time. And the feedback that I'm getting from them is that it's made a significant difference.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that it's kind of a unique sport and the unique business model that the UFC has. Do you ever have any pressure from the fact that, if you lose a high-profile fighter like Brock Lesnar or Jon Jones to a positive test, that there's bad publicity out of it and you're also losing a major draw? Does anybody ever come and talk to you about these things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was pretty depressed after the Jon Jones scenario, happening so close to such a landmark event, UFC 200, but I was really uplifted in the days after that as I was approached by other fighters and coaches, and basically they all said, wow, if we didn't think this was a real program before, we certainly do now. And again, that's the beauty of handing this off to USADA. They have zero business interests. So, in the Jones situation, it may not be good for the bottom line of the company, at least short term, in terms of the athletes gaining trust and respect for the program and knowing that it's real. That had a significant effect on that viewpoint.
You have a long experience in anti-doping and investigating steroids in particular. What kind of substances do you find are being abused by mixed martial artists?
Yeah, I think it runs the gamut. There's drugs that'll make you stronger. There's drugs that'll give you more endurance. There's stimulants that'll get you going at a high level. Really every drug that I've seen pervasive in other sports, I think could have an application to mixed martial arts. The ability to get bigger, stronger, faster, have more endurance, to recover quicker from injuries or soreness would all have a benefit to an MMA fighter. So really, all the drugs on the WADA prohibited list, I think would be at play here.
Are there particular substances or particular types of substances that you see cropping up in tests, both positive and just under?
Well, you've seen a little bit of everything under this program. You've seen positive results for anabolic steroids. You've seen them for growth hormone and growth hormone peptides. You've seen them for blood boosting drugs. So I don't really think it's limited to one class of drugs. All the performance enhancing drugs would have a benefit to an MMA fighter.
Have you drawn from your experience of other sports? Are there parallels between, say, the investigations you did in cycling or in US track and field and your work in the UFC at the moment?
Yeah, there's big parallels. I think, first and foremost is there's definitely a reward aspect to using these drugs, and that's going through, I think, every athlete's mind, where there's a financial incentive to be great in your sport. Again, these drugs, an already great skilled athlete will make them even greater, more skilled, stronger. So there's always this reward element. I think in any instance with any anti-doping program, athletes are always doing a risk reward calculation. So you have to set the risk bar very high so that it outweighs that reward. And when we put the rules in place for this program, definitely in terms of what our sanctions were. So a first time offense under this program can be anywhere from 2 to 4 years. And that's a level where that risk starts getting up to a level where it definitely outweighs the reward. Most of the athletes that I spoke with in my previous career and all other sports told me one of the main reason that they decided to go down that route was that the reward outweighed the risk. So either their sports governing body didn't have much of any testing program at all, or the sanctions were minor, just a month or a quarter of the season in the NFL for a first time offense right now. That's a level where definitely the reward is higher than the risk. So that was at our forefront of our heads when we put our program together.
What would you say the level of knowledge is among the athletes? Do they know, the kind of substances they're using, and in particular supplements? Do they know what it is they're looking at? Do they know where to turn if they suspect that a supplement may be tainted or that it may be?
Well, that's a major task that fell on our plate, and I was really impressed with the way USADA implemented the program. So the first, maybe 6 months of the program, the testing numbers gradually increased. The emphasis early on in the program was education. So as soon as we announced, our policy and the rules, myself and a couple of USADA representatives went on the road. We visited major gyms throughout the world. We visited, probably 75-80% of the events that first year. And the purpose was to provide formal education to our athletes so that A, they're aware exactly, what the rules and regulations are with the program, but B, they're aware of things like you just talked about, dietary supplements and the dangers of that industry and how careful and how much care needs to be exerted to ensure that they didn't take products that had prohibited substances in them.
Is it very easy to do so? If you go to like a supermarket here in the USA, can you pick stuff off the shelf that contains banned substances? Is it that simple?
Absolutely. It's, pre-market, it's an unregulated market. So you and I could go outside and scoop up a shovel full of dirt and put it in a bottle and go put it on the shelf of a supplement store. There's no government regulations either here in the U.S. or worldwide that I'm aware of where anyone looks at that product pre-market to ensure it has what it says is on the label or it doesn't have impurities or contaminants. So it's a very, very real issue, and we've seen a few cases actually under our program where athletes have unknowingly ingested supplements that had contaminants in that. Now, we provide our athletes with a whole ton of resources to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think now, after them having been educated for a period of time, there's really no excuse for them not to do their due diligence. They have those resources, whether using them themselves or reaching out to me. I mean, that's a major part of my job, is to be that resource to athletes. And I get, on a daily basis, at least a half dozen inquiries regarding supplements. Athletes will go to the store and take a photo and say, "Hey Jeff, can you check this with me for me through my sources?" And I can do that for them. So athletes that don't use those resources right now, there's consequences. They're strictly liable for what's in their body, but we really do feel that we've given them the tools to make those smart decisions, and there's no excuse if they're not making those.
Would you like to see the Food and Drug Administration here in the US involved more in regulating the supplement market?
Yeah, absolutely would. I mean, that's my previous job, was with the FDA for 7 years, and I saw the regulation or enforcement or lack thereof in the industry. I think governments really across the world can do a much, much better job. And we're, as an advocate to our athletes, I will always be pushing for that.
Some of the defences that are offered, I mean, it's one of the immediate first defence for many is it was a tainted supplement. We've also heard in many of the sports that you've worked in about tainted meat coming from certain countries. How much faith do you place in these things, and how much of it is an athlete not being willing to hold up their hand and say, look, I did something wrong?
Yeah, well, the nice thing of having USADA as our resource that implements the program is, an athlete can provide whatever excuse they want, but there's science and research that goes on to determine whether or not that excuse is real. For instance, if an athlete claims, it was from a tainted supplement, USADA most often will independently procure that supplement so the athlete doesn't have any interaction with that supplement, so they couldn't be tainting it themselves. USADA will test that supplement. Not only would that prohibited substance have to be in the supplement, but it would have to be in there at a level that matched the level that was in the athlete's system. So yeah, I'm often asked, hey, can an athlete just throw out, an excuse of a tainted supplement? And yeah, they can, but there's a lot of, detective work that goes on behind the scenes to ensure that, if that is a legitimate excuse, all the pieces of the puzzle fit.
Finally, if I could ask you, you're a year and a half or so into the program now. If I sit down here with you in 5 years' time, what does the doping situation or the anti-doping situation in mixed martial arts and in the UFC, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, it's something that's constantly evolving, and definitely, the science side and the detection side is always probably a little bit behind the doping side, but it's catching up rapidly. I mean, I compare it to what I saw kind of when I started off in this field about 15 years ago. And the improvements that have been made in the anti-doping side are incredible in those 15 years. Unfortunately, I don't think doping's ever going away, so it will be, a constant battle. But I think on literally a daily basis, the anti-doping side of things is catching up. It's definitely changed over these years the way I see athletes using these substances. Where 15 years ago, I mean, they used them really without any regard because the testing was not good or there was a lack thereof. Now the testing has become much more sophisticated, and you're seeing athletes who do still choose to dope adjust. So they're using much smaller amounts. They're microdosing amounts that will clear the system quickly. They don't, they'll retain some benefits from that, but not as much as, in the past. So I think that's got to be looked at as, as a victory for the anti-doping side. And I continue to see, in these next 5 years, small victories, in the larger war.
Thank you.
All right.
Now, if we could just ask you, I'm just going to turn this down, turn down the microphone.